This is my true story. I raised my daughter alone after her father left. I worked double shifts, sold my jewelry, and gave her everything I never had. I thought her wedding day would be the moment she'd say, "Thank you, Mom." But instead, she looked at me and said I'd ruin her wedding if I came. I stood there silent, holding back tears. She walked away, and my heart cracked in half. But I didn't argue. I just smiled, because I already knew what I was going to do next. Before that, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. And please subscribe so my story can reach more people. She came over that afternoon with her hair pinned up and her voice rehearsed. I knew something was off from the way she stood near the door, not sitting, not smiling. Her hands were shaking as she held that white veil, the same one I'd helped her pick out months ago. She said, "Mom, please, don't come to the wedding." I thought I misheard. She avoided my eyes and added, "You'll embarrass me." Just like that. No anger. Just quiet rejection wrapped in politeness. I stood there frozen, trying to understand how a daughter could say that to the mother who carried her through every storm. My throat tightened, but I managed to smile. I told her I understood, even though every part of me wanted to scream. She talked about the guests, the cameras, the fancy crowd that might not get me, as if love needed to be staged for approval. I nodded anyway, pretending I agreed because sometimes silence hurts less than begging to be seen. She said she'd send me photos after the ceremony, as if a picture could replace presents. When she left, the house felt hollow. I stared at the empty chair she used to sit in when she was little, doing homework while I cooked. The smell of her perfume lingered in the air, a smell that used to mean family but now meant distance. I stood in that same kitchen for hours, holding the edge of the counter, trying not to cry. I remembered her first school play, how she froze on stage until she saw me clapping in the crowd. That was all it took to give her courage. And now, the same daughter who once looked for me in every audience didn't want me anywhere near her biggest day. That kind of pain doesn't scream. It just sits heavy, like a stone inside your chest. I made tea just to have something to hold. The cup rattled in my hand. I told myself it was fine, that maybe she had her reasons, that maybe I really didn't belong. But deep down, I knew it wasn't about embarrassment. It was about pride. Somewhere along the way, she started believing love was conditional, that she could choose when to acknowledge the person who built her life. I walked to my room and saw the dress I'd planned to wear hanging neatly on the hanger. Pale blue, simple, respectable. I had ironed it weeks before, thinking it would be a proud day. Now it looked foolish, like hope left waiting for an invitation that never came. I sat on the edge of the bed, folded the dress, and placed it back in the closet. The sound of the hanger scraping the metal rod echoed louder than any argument we could have had. I could have fought back. I could have reminded her who paid for her education, who sold jewelry to cover her college fees, who stayed awake every night when she was sick. But I didn't. Because love doesn't need proof shouted in anger. It needs silence strong enough to survive betrayal. When night came, I turned off every light in the house and sat by the window. I could see the reflection of myself, older, tired, but still standing. My heart whispered that dignity sometimes means walking away from places you built with your own hands. I realized that day she didn't just exclude me from her wedding, she excluded the truth of who she was. And no ceremony built on denial lasts long. I wiped my tears, straightened my shoulders, and whispered to the empty room, "You'll understand one day." Because deep inside, I knew something she didn't. That life has a way of correcting pride. That a mother's absence can echo louder than her presence ever did. And I decided right there, I wouldn't ruin her wedding. I'd let her make that mistake herself. But I wasn't done. I was just quiet. Every part of that wedding existed because of me. The venue deposit, the catering advance, the lace veil, all paid from my savings account. I didn't complain, not once. I told myself that's what mothers do. I sold my gold bangles, the ones my own mother left me. I skipped my blood pressure medicine for a month so I could stretch every penny. I even borrowed money from a neighbor once, just to help cover the flower arrangements she wanted so badly. When she showed me the receipts, I smiled. I didn't ask for anything back. I thought, maybe, when she looked around that hall full of light and laughter, she would remember whose hands made it possible. But gratitude has a short memory. She called it her dream wedding. I called it the last time I would give blindly, because somewhere between her excitement and my sacrifice, she forgot the meaning of respect. Every time she sent an update, the dress, the photographer, the decorations, I replied with hearts and blessings. She never noticed that I'd stopped saying we. It was all her day, her dream, her moment. But behind that joy, I was shrinking. Each decision reminded me that I was not part of her world anymore. She'd built something I paid for but wasn't welcome to enter. That's not just exclusion, that's erasure. I remember looking at my empty bank book one morning. Every line showed her happiness, and every zero showed my silence. I laughed to myself, a dry, bitter laugh that only someone betrayed by love can understand. I wasn't angry about the money. I was angry about the way she treated the help she once called Mom. Still, I told myself to let it go. I thought maybe when she stood at that altar, something would stir in her heart. Maybe she would realize what she'd done and send for me. But pride doesn't wake up that easily. I stayed quiet. I didn't tell anyone she had uninvited me. The neighbors thought I was attending. They congratulated me in advance. I just nodded. Because explaining humiliation is harder than living through it. I sat one evening with her childhood photos spread across the table. Her first birthday, her graduation, her first paycheck. Every milestone had me beside her. Every smile had my reflection in her eyes. And yet, for the biggest day of her life, she decided those eyes would look for someone else. I folded the pictures back into the drawer. My tears had already blurred some of the edges. I whispered, "You'll learn one day what it means to be alone on a day you thought was full." That's when something shifted inside me. I didn't want revenge. I wanted realization. And sometimes those two arrive in the same disguise. I thought about the father she hadn't seen in years, the man she blamed for leaving, the man I'd protected her from by staying silent about the truth. Maybe, I thought, it was time for the truth to walk her down the aisle. I had one favor left to call in, one number left that still remembered both our names. That was the moment I decided. If she wanted to erase me from that wedding, I would give her something impossible to forget. The wedding was the talk of the town. Every neighbor mentioned it. Every store owner asked if I was excited. I smiled and said yes, pretending I was still part of it. I didn't tell them I wasn't invited. I saw pictures online, the floral arches, the expensive lights, the white chairs lined in perfect rows. It was everything she wanted, everything I'd once dreamed for her. But I was nowhere in it, not even in the background, not even in a mention. I sat with my tea, scrolling through the photos until my hands shook. I wasn't jealous. I was invisible. That's worse. People asked if I was helping her get ready that morning. I lied and said she had things handled. I didn't want pity. I didn't want gossip. I wanted peace. But peace doesn't come easy when your child cuts you out of her life with a smile. I watched her new world unfold without me. Friends, decorations, speeches, a celebration built on a missing piece. I wondered if she'd even noticed the silence where my clapping should have been. Then one night, as I looked through the invitation list she had left behind on my kitchen counter, I noticed something. There was a blank space near the end, a missing name, one that should have been there long ago. It wasn't mine. It was his, her father, the man she believed abandoned us when she was 10, the man whose name she refused to say for years, the man who had tried, once, to make things right. I remembered how he stood at my door 15 years ago, flowers in hand, tears in his eyes. I didn't let him in. I thought I was protecting her. I thought keeping him away would stop her pain. But maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was protecting myself. Now, years later, the same silence I gave him was the silence she was giving me. It hit me like a mirror. Every choice, every word, coming back around. I picked up the phone, his old number still written on a scrap of paper tucked behind a photo frame. I stared at it for hours that night, unsure if it was still valid, unsure if I even had the right to call. But then I thought, if she could erase me from her own wedding, why should I protect her from truth anymore? Maybe it was time for her to face the part of her story she'd buried, the part she never understood. That empty space on the guest list didn't bother me anymore. It inspired me, because now I had an idea. She didn't want me there. Fine. But she was about to get a guest she didn't expect. one who carried the truth she'd been running from her whole life. He was not a bad man. He made mistakes, yes, but he was never cruel. When my daughter was young, he adored her. He built her dollhouse by hand, worked long hours, and always brought her small surprises. But when life got hard, he broke under the weight of it. One argument, one night of pride, and he left. She was 10. He tried to come back months later, but by then, she had already decided he didn't love her. I was angry too. I told him to stay away. I said she didn't need him anymore. He left again, quiet this time. No fight, no goodbye, just gone. I told myself I did the right thing, that I was protecting her, but in truth I was punishing him, and in doing that I robbed her of knowing the truth, that he didn't leave because he stopped loving her. He left because he didn't know how to face his own mistakes. Years passed, and she grew up believing her father abandoned her. Every time she saw other girls with their dads, she'd look away. I never corrected her. I let her carry that anger because it made her strong, or at least that's what I told myself to sleep at night. But now, standing in a life that had pushed me out, I realized strength built on lies never lasts. He had written letters. I found them later, unopened, tucked inside an old box. Letters where he begged to see her, to explain, to make things right. I kept them hidden. I didn't think she was ready. Maybe I didn't want her to forgive him, because forgiving him meant forgiving me too. After she banned me from her wedding, I couldn't stop thinking about those letters. Each word was a truth she never heard, and suddenly it felt cruel that I had silenced his voice. I picked up my phone and scrolled to his name. The number was old. I hadn't used it in years. My hand trembled as I typed his name into a search bar, half hoping he'd disappeared, half praying he hadn't. When I found him, he lived 2 towns away. Alone. Retired. A small photo showed a man older, grayer, but still carrying that same gentle smile that once made our daughter laugh. My throat tightened. I hesitated for a full day before calling. When he answered, his voice cracked. "Hello?" That one word carried decades. I almost hung up, but I said, "It's me." There was silence. Then I heard his breath catch. He didn't ask how I was. He said, "Is she okay?" I closed my eyes. "She's getting married," I said. He didn't respond right away. Then softly, "She's all grown." "Yes," I whispered, "but she doesn't want me there." The line went silent again. I could hear his voice trembling when he finally spoke. "She doesn't want you?" "No," I said, "but maybe she'll want you." He didn't understand at first. I explained everything, the words she said, the way she'd pushed me away, the years of misunderstanding. He didn't interrupt once. When I finished, he asked only one thing. Would she even recognize me? "She will," I said. "A child never forgets a face they once trusted." He sighed, long and tired. "What do you want me to do?" "I want you to be there," I said quietly. "I can't walk her down the aisle. Maybe it's time someone else did." There was a pause that felt like the world holding its breath. Then he whispered, "Send me the date." After we hung up, I sat still for a long time. My hands were shaking, but my heart was steady. For the first time in years, I didn't feel powerless. I wasn't trying to ruin her day. I was trying to give her the truth she deserved. I looked at the old letters again and smiled sadly. The words he once tried to give her would now walk beside her, not in ink, but in person. She thought she erased him from her story, but the thing about truth is, it never disappears. It waits. And when the right moment comes, it returns, even if it has to walk down the aisle to do it. The number stayed on the table for a full day before I touched it. My mind wasn't racing. It was calm, cold, focused. The plan was already made. It wasn't about revenge. It was about balance. The silence she gave me needed to echo. That night, I sat in the dark with the phone in my hand. No lights, no noise, just the soft ticking of the wall clock and the weight of everything that had led to this. I pressed the number. Once, twice. It rang. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The decision had already left my heart and entered motion. The next morning, I mailed a small envelope. Inside it, the invitation, the address, and the date. No explanation, no message, just the truth wrapped in paper, the kind of truth that doesn't shout but still shakes walls. After that, I waited. Days passed slowly. I cooked simple meals, watered the plants, folded the same blanket twice just to fill the hours. There was no guilt, only a strange calm, like watching a storm build from far away. I didn't want to see it, but I couldn't stop it either. I knew he would come. People like him don't stay gone forever. They wait for an opening, one moment where they can rewrite their story. This was that moment. The week before the wedding, I started receiving photos from relatives, dresses, decorations, smiles. I replied with hearts, pretending I was happy. But inside, I was done pretending. I had already done my part. My absence would be louder than any presents I could have offered. The world around me carried on. The florist called to confirm an order I hadn't placed. The seamstress called to check if I needed alterations. I told them all no, I wasn't going. My part in that story had ended the day she told me not to come. Still, I made sure everything stayed perfect. The bills were paid. The arrangements were untouched. I didn't want anyone to say I'd ruined her day. I wanted her to see what real grace looked like, the kind that doesn't chase invitations. The day before the wedding, I looked at the clock at midnight. I imagined her trying on the dress one last time, checking the mirror, smiling at her reflection. I wondered if she'd notice what was missing, not me, but the truth. When morning came, the house felt too quiet. The air felt thick. I didn't open the curtains. I didn't want the sunlight. I wanted stillness. I sat in my chair by the window and waited. Not for news, not for forgiveness. Just for time to do what time does best. Reveal everything. I didn't call anyone. I didn't text. I didn't check photos online. I just existed. A mother erased but not gone. My work was done. By evening I made tea again. The same routine, same cup, same chair. But the heaviness in my chest had changed. It wasn't grief anymore. It was release. Somewhere across town, plans were unfolding that I didn't need to witness. A reunion was being written in silence. A truth was walking toward a girl who thought she knew everything about her life. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just breathed. Because sometimes revenge doesn't need noise, proof, or witnesses. It only needs patience. That night I went to bed early. I didn't dream. My mind was blank. My heart was steady. The last thought that crossed my mind was simple. When you're told to stay away, staying away becomes the loudest way to return. The next morning, I woke up and poured another cup of tea. The sun was brighter, the air lighter. I didn't know how the day would unfold, but I didn't need to. The truth was already walking down an aisle where I wasn't invited, and for the first time in years, I felt peace. The morning came quietly, no calls, no messages. The world moved like any other day. But something about the air felt heavier, the kind of heaviness that waits for something to happen. She was at the venue hours before everyone else. Flowers were being arranged, cameras being tested, people moving fast. The perfect day she wanted was unfolding without a flaw. Guests arrived, smiling, laughing, unaware that a ghost was walking among them. The past had found its seat in the front row. No one knew it yet. The music began, soft and slow. The doors opened. Every head turned. The bride appeared, glowing, proud, unaware of the shift waiting ahead. The aisle stretched long and perfect. She waited for the cue for the man who would take her hand. But it wasn't me. It wasn't anyone she expected. It was the man she'd forgotten, the man she thought never cared. He stood at the entrance, older, worn, eyes full of years she never saw. For a moment, the world seemed to pause. The crowd looked confused. The whispers began, but he didn't hesitate. Step by step, he walked forward, steady, silent, sure. She stood frozen, holding the bouquet tighter, her smile fading. The music carried on as if nothing had changed, but everything had. He reached her, slow but certain. He didn't speak. He didn't explain. He simply offered his arm. Her fingers trembled. Her face went pale. The air around her shifted from pride to disbelief. The guests were silent now. The photographers lowered their cameras. The pianist hesitated at the keys. And still, the music played. He guided her forward. The steps were uneven, not from nerves, but from shock. The whispers grew, the crowd confused but respectful. No one understood who he was. No one knew the story buried under that walk. But I did. I sat miles away, calm, composed, knowing that the truth had just entered her life wearing the same suit it left in. She didn't look back. She couldn't. Each step she took beside him was a step through the lies she'd lived with. The ceremony continued. The priest waited at the altar, unsure. The guests exchanged looks. The photographers captured every moment, unaware that the most powerful picture that day wasn't of a wedding. It was of recognition. When she finally reached the end of the aisle, her breathing had changed. The tears had started, but she didn't stop walking. The truth had her hand, and she followed it. At home, I didn't watch the clock. I didn't pace. I didn't wait for news. Some moments don't need to be witnessed. They just need to happen. The church bells rang that afternoon. I heard them faintly from my window. The sound was calm, distant, complete. It wasn't about payback. It was about balance. The silence I was given had found its voice. The shame she tried to bury had met its reflection. By evening, the photos began to spread online, the comments filled with questions. People wondered who the man was. Some called it touching, some called it strange. She didn't explain. She didn't post captions. She didn't smile in later pictures. Something inside her had shifted. The day she tried to erase me became the day she met the part of herself she never understood, the part that came from both of us. And while she stood there in that perfect white dress, the story she built without me finally became whole, not by my presence, but by my absence. I didn't ruin her wedding. I gave it truth. The first sound was the music slowing, as if even the instruments hesitated to continue. The second sound was the whisper, a soft wave moving through the guests, uncertain, almost afraid to speak. The third sound was the quiet gasp that left her mouth when she finally saw his face clearly. The veil trembled in her hands, her lips parted but no words came out. The photographer lowered his camera. The bridesmaids stopped smiling. The priest waited in silence. For the first time that day, no one knew what to do. She didn't faint. She didn't scream. She simply froze. The kind of stillness that only happens when years of belief collapse in one breath. The man beside her didn't move. He stood calm, respectful, patient, as if time had folded to give her this moment. She blinked once, twice, as if trying to clear the image from her eyes. It didn't go away. Reality never does. Her bouquet slipped slightly from her grip. One petal fell, then another, until the white roses scattered down the aisle like lost memories. People started whispering names. Some said it was her uncle. Some said it was a family friend, but no one truly knew. He didn't look at anyone else, only her. Every step they took together down that aisle was quiet, heavy, full of questions she wasn't ready to ask. Her posture changed. The proud shoulders sank a little lower. The smile that had been fixed in place softened, cracked, disappeared. The glow faded. The perfection she wanted to show the world began to break under something stronger. Truth. He didn't touch her too tightly. He didn't guide her like a stranger. He walked beside her the way only a father could, and in that walk she remembered what she'd lost. The pieces of childhood she buried, the stories she never heard, the man she hated without understanding why. When they reached the altar, she stopped. The priest asked if she was ready to begin. She didn't answer. Her throat tightened. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. The groom looked uncertain, trying to smile, waiting for her to recover. But she couldn't. Her eyes glistened, her chest rose in uneven breaths. That silence stretched long enough to change the atmosphere in the entire church. No one clapped. No one laughed. They just watched a daughter meet the past she never forgave. He stepped back slightly, letting her stand alone, but she didn't move. Her feet stayed rooted. The tears finally broke free, slow and quiet, falling onto her dress. The guests thought it was emotion from the moment, a father walking his daughter down the aisle. But it wasn't pride. It was realization, the kind that burns from the inside. Somewhere in the back row, a relative whispered my name. She turned her head slightly, maybe expecting to see me there. But I wasn't. The space was empty. The one seat that should have been filled with her mother remained untouched. Her eyes lingered there for a moment too long. She looked lost. The man beside her saw it too. He didn't speak, but his expression said what I already knew. Absence can speak louder than words ever could. The ceremony continued because it had to. The music resumed, slow and hesitant. She said her vows, her voice unsteady, trembling on every word. The guests smiled again, pretending everything was fine. But everyone had seen it. The break, the shift, the truth. After the ceremony, they took photos. Smiles were practiced, but her eyes told a different story. In each picture, the brightness dimmed a little more. Her hands fidgeted with her bouquet, her shoulders slightly turned away from the crowd. The laughter around her sounded distant. That night, when the last guest left and the lights dimmed, the image of him walking her down that aisle stayed everywhere, in every phone, every post, every conversation. She had gotten the perfect wedding she planned. But the picture that spread wasn't of the decorations or the dress. It was of her standing beside a man she thought she'd lost, holding back tears she didn't understand. The world saw beauty. She saw consequence. And far away, sitting in the quiet of my small living room, I felt the silence settle like closure. She had wanted a wedding free of me. Instead, she got a wedding full of everything she tried to forget. Sometimes love doesn't need to attend. It only needs to appear where truth was missing. And on that day, truth walked her down the aisle. The day ended, but the noise didn't. The wedding hall emptied slowly, one chair at a time, one voice at a time, until the echo of the music faded into silence. What remained was the weight of what had happened. The perfect picture she had built cracked quietly in the corners. The guests left talking in low tones. Some smiled out of politeness. Some stayed quiet because they had no words. The air carried confusion, sympathy, and something else she couldn't name. When the doors closed, she stood in front of the mirror in her dressing room. The reflection looking back didn't match the dream she had imagined. Her makeup was streaked, her smile was gone. The dress still shone, but the glow behind it had died. The room smelled of flowers and perfume, but underneath it lingered the faint scent of regret. She sat down, bouquet on her lap, and finally allowed her hands to shake. The noise outside grew distant. The applause had ended. The laughter had vanished. The silence that followed was the kind that feels heavier than grief. It was realization. Her husband tried to talk to her, but his words blurred into background sound. She nodded, pretending to listen. Her mind wasn't there anymore. It was back in time, to every unanswered question, every missing letter, every story she'd chosen not to ask about. The image of him walking toward her replayed again and again, his face, older but familiar, the way he stood, the way he waited, the quiet steadiness of it all. It didn't look like guilt, it looked like truth. And truth has a way of cutting deeper than any insult ever could. She remembered the times she'd asked me about him and how I always changed the subject. She remembered the anger she carried toward a man who never fought back. She remembered the stories she told herself to fill the silence. Each memory turned into a sharp edge. The tears finally came, slow and uncontrollable. They rolled down her face without warning. She pressed her hand against her mouth, trying to stop the sound, but her body trembled with every breath. It wasn't sadness anymore. It was collapse, the quiet breaking of pride when it runs out of lies to stand on. Her bridesmaids knocked on the door, asking if she was okay. She said yes. They believed her because they wanted to. She stood again, fixed her veil, looked in the mirror one last time, and saw what no camera could capture, the face of someone who finally saw herself clearly. Outside, people were still talking. The story of the man who walked her down the aisle had already started spreading. Some said it was touching. Others said it was strange. But she knew what it really was. It was unfinished business, finally arriving uninvited. By the time she got home that night, the lights from the reception had faded behind her. The car ride was quiet. The driver didn't ask questions. The city lights passed like distant thoughts. Her mind replayed the moment again and again until she couldn't breathe. When she reached her house, she stood by the door, dress heavy with exhaustion. The key trembled in her hand. The silence inside greeted her like judgment. She closed the door and leaned against it, eyes closed, body still. For a long time she didn't move. Then she walked to her room, sat on the edge of her bed, and buried her face in her hands. She didn't know if she hated me or missed me. She didn't know if she was angry at him or herself. But for the first time she understood what emptiness really meant. She had the dress, the photos, the husband, the home, everything that was supposed to mean success, yet all of it felt hollow, because without truth, celebration turns into weight. That night, she didn't sleep. The clock ticked slowly. The makeup dried on her cheeks. Her hands stayed cold. The words she'd said to me days before, "You'll ruin my wedding if you come," echoed louder than the church bells that morning. She didn't know it yet, but that was the moment pride stopped living inside her. What took its place was something quieter, heavier, and far more real. The morning after the wedding arrived without celebration. The sunlight crept through her window like it was unsure if it belonged there. The house was quiet, still decorated with leftover flowers, cold coffee, and half-opened gifts. The white dress hung near the window, wrinkled and heavy, no longer glowing the way it did yesterday. She sat at the edge of her bed, eyes swollen, hands clasped together. The silence didn't bother her anymore. It was company now. Her phone buzzed over and over. Messages, photos, congratulations. She didn't open them. Each notification felt like a reminder of a moment she didn't recognize anymore. The world saw beauty, but she saw consequence. She stood slowly and walked to the mirror. Her reflection looked older, tired, stripped of something she couldn't name. The woman staring back wasn't a bride anymore. She was a daughter who finally saw what she had done. Outside, the world went on. Cars passed, neighbors smiled, birds sang, life moved. But inside that house, everything stood still. Every sound was muted by the weight of what had changed. The one person she'd pushed away was the only one she wanted to see. Pride had left, and all that remained was regret. By afternoon, the memories returned like quiet visitors. Every moment she had with me, every meal, every talk, every argument, came back one by one. She remembered the way I waited up for her every night when she was late. She remembered how I saved for her college while skipping my own doctor visits. She remembered how I smiled through insults just to keep peace. Those memories didn't hurt because they were gone. They hurt because she finally understood them. The realization came slowly, not like thunder, but like rain that doesn't stop. The things she thought were control, independence, and pride now looked small, almost childish. She had traded love for approval. She had chosen image over family. And when the applause faded, no one was left but silence. She walked to the kitchen. The smell of coffee reminded her of mornings at my house, the same routine, the same cup, the same comfort. The emptiness inside her chest felt larger now. The more she tried to ignore it, the louder it grew. Regret doesn't shout. It sits quietly and waits until you can't avoid it anymore. That evening, when the sun began to set, she finally did what she had avoided all along. She left her house. She didn't take her husband. She didn't call anyone. She drove alone, past the streets she hadn't seen in years, past the store I used to visit, past the park we once sat in every Sunday. Her hands gripped the wheel tight, her eyes wet, her heart beating fast. When she reached my house, she didn't knock at first. She just stood outside, dress wrinkled, hair undone, mascara faint like old bruises. The porch light was on, the same one I never turned off, just in case she ever came back. She took a breath and finally knocked. I opened the door slowly. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her eyes said everything. She looked smaller, softer, the kind of small that comes only after breaking. She stepped inside, still silent, and stood there like a lost child in her own mother's home. For a long time, neither of us moved. Then she stepped closer and rested her head against my shoulder. Her breath was shaky, her hands cold. She didn't apologize. She didn't explain. She just stood there. And I held her. Because sometimes the punishment isn't rejection. It's understanding. She stayed that night, sitting by the table where she once studied as a child, the same table that held her homework, her laughter, her first dreams. Now it held quiet tears and silence between every breath. The clock ticked, slow and steady. When she finally spoke, her voice was low. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't ask for comfort. She just said one word: why? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. She already knew. The lesson wasn't in the pain, it was in the realization that love doesn't disappear when you ignore it. It just waits. And when pride collapses, love walks back in through the same door it was once pushed out of. That night, we sat together until the silence turned soft again. She cried quietly, and I let her. Because sometimes silence fixes what words never can. The next morning felt different. The air was still, gentle, quiet in a way that felt new. The sun touched the curtains softly, lighting the room without asking permission. She was still asleep on the couch, wrapped in a blanket she once called old-fashioned. Her makeup was gone, her hair undone, her breathing slow. For the first time in years, her face looked peaceful, not proud, not perfect, just human. I stood in the doorway and watched her for a moment, the way mothers do when they know words aren't needed anymore. The kettle whistled. The smell of tea filled the house. The same smell that used to greet her every morning when she was little. She opened her eyes and looked around like she was waking from a dream that had lasted too long. Her gaze landed on me, and for a second, neither of us spoke. She looked different, not from the dress or the makeup, but from what the truth had done to her. There was no anger left, only quiet understanding. She knew. She had seen what pride costs. She had felt what absence does. She had learned the lesson without me ever speaking it aloud. She sat at the table, her hands wrapped around the cup. The silence between us wasn't awkward. It was healing. The kind of silence that doesn't demand apologies because it already knows the truth. I didn't mention the wedding. I didn't ask about the guests, the food, or the pictures. Some stories don't need retelling. They live in the spaces between what's said and what's finally understood. She didn't explain herself either. She didn't try to justify anything. She just sat there drinking tea, eyes red but calm. The house felt alive again, not loud, not full, but real. The sound of the spoon against the cup, the soft clinking, the steady breathing, small, ordinary sounds that mean everything when peace returns. I looked at her hands. They used to be small enough to hold in one palm. Now they carried the weight of a life that had gone too far without love. And yet, they still looked like her hands. The same ones that once reached for me when she was afraid of storms. The same ones that now trembled when truth finally reached her. There was no need to talk about forgiveness. Forgiveness had already happened in silence, the kind that doesn't ask or promise. It just exists. Later, she stood near the window, staring outside. The morning light caught the edge of her face, soft and reflective. She whispered something under her breath. Maybe it was gratitude. Maybe it was regret. Maybe both. I realized then that what I had done wasn't revenge. It wasn't punishment. It was restoration. The truth had been buried too long, and sometimes it takes a shock to bring it back to life. When she left later that day, she didn't say goodbye in words. She just hugged me, long and firm, the kind of hug that doesn't need to end. Her tears fell quietly onto my shoulder, and I felt the same peace I'd been missing for years. The door closed softly behind her. The house went quiet again, but it wasn't empty anymore. It was whole. I walked to the table, picked up her empty cup, and smiled faintly. I thought about everything that had happened, the words that cut deep, the silence that healed, the walk that changed everything. She had told me I would ruin her wedding if I came. I didn't. I stayed home. I stayed silent. I let truth do the walking. When she saw who took my place, her pride shattered, and her heart finally opened. It wasn't anger that fixed what was broken. It was absence. The kind of absence that teaches more than presence ever could. Love doesn't need to stand in every photograph. Sometimes it stands outside the frame, waiting for the moment it's invited back in. That morning, as I sat with my tea, the house felt light again, quiet, warm, and alive. Some stories don't end with words. They end with understanding. And this one finally did.